wrestling fans, and welcome to another edition of John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight podcast. We are the only wrestling podcast that brings you back 30 years with vintage audio featuring some of the biggest names at that time. And this episode is certainly no exception. We got a good one for you today, everybody. The Pro Wrestling Spotlight covered all the news stories and breaking developments that happened in real time, and now we get to relive those moments right here on this podcast, audio and video. And this week, we cover the news that broke 30 years ago when we learned of the passing of a giant in the wrestling business and a giant in the entertainment business. It was the death of Andre the Giant on January 27th, 1993. Today, we will bring on two very special guests, one of whom knew Andre very well. The other is perhaps the foremost Andre the Giant historian anywhere. I'm referring to Jackie McCauley, formerly Jackie Bernard, who was married at one time to Frenchy Bernard, and Chris Owens, who has amassed a collection of Andre memorabilia that really is unsurpassed. We'll play clips from the episode of the Pro Wrestling Spotlight from January 30th, 1993, when we got the news and brought on the show immediately Frenchy Bernard. Right now, I want to bring on Marsh, our producer and creative director. Marsh, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going, John? I'm doing good.
That's good. We got a good one for everybody today, don't we?
Yeah, this was a cool one to listen to. This was, again, a change of pace from what you were normally doing week to week, but that seems to be the pace this year in 93. Every week was different.
Yeah, certainly was. And this episode in particular was one that, listening back for the first time in 30 years and listening to the gravity of what happened, it was, and Andre was in bad health. We all knew that, and his time in the ring was certainly slowing down. But to hear the news that this icon, the guy that headlined WrestleMania 3, the guy that made his debut at Madison Square Garden in 1973, and everything that he did in the business as an attraction, as somebody that sold out arenas around the world, it was still a shock. You weren't around back then, Marsh. I certainly understand that, but
I vividly remember finding out when he died, and I was just a kid. He died in 93. I was born in 84. I was 9.
Yeah.
And I remember it, and I remember being impacted pretty heavily.
You were just getting into wrestling as a kid, and I tell you, Andre touched all ages, and he was someone who I got to spend a little time with. I'll share that when we bring our guest on in just a bit. Chris will be with us via video, and Jackie, we're going to be calling at her home in Florida, and she and her ex-husband, Frenchy, lived on that farm in Ellerbe, North Carolina. So it's going to be a good one today. Before we get going with all of that, I want to tell everybody about my Patreon page, patreon.com/John Arezzi. There's so much content up there. I put up so much stuff this past Sunday that we've gotten some great response from that. The Patreon account is important because it helps cover the cost of producing and distributing this show. And I do appreciate your support. If you're not currently a member of this community, $5 a month gets you in the door. And for that, you get the entire archives of the Pro Wrestling Spotlight. This is show 190. So there's 190 shows up on Patreon. And we even have some of my old college shows up there. There's video to enjoy. And we just recently taped it. Memories from Madison Square Garden, the other podcasts that I do, and we cover that those events 50 years after it happened, and we reviewed the January 15th, 1973 show, a couple of shows before Andre made his debut, and that was the first time I had an 8mm camera and brought it to the arena, and so I put those clips up on Patreon as well, so you get a chance to see those as well. So there's so much up there. Patreon.com/John Arezzi. Give it a, just check it out, browse, and you'll see all the content that's on there. And also our eBay store is really rocking. I started that about a week and a half ago. And there are lots of items up there. I'm putting up a lot of pictures that fans will enjoy and they could purchase. I have wrestling photos, as I said, bundle packages that include and you see him back of me over my shoulder if you're watching this on video. I have Matt Memories bundle packages, which you get a cap, a Pro Wrestling Spotlight cap. You get a signed copy of my book, Matt Memories, and you also get an autographed poster from the book as well. So that's all up on eBay. All you got to do is go to ebay.com, and that is ebay.com/Matt Memories. So just look for us there. Lots of stuff on there, not just wrestling items. I have some Beatles stuff up there, Kiss autograph photos. I got to know Peter Criss in 1976 when Kiss was just exploding big time. So I have an autographed photo of the 4 original members. Also signed item of Peter Criss is up there. There's Billy Joel pictures. So I'm looking at all this memorabilia I had. I had a ticket stub, Marsh, from WrestleMania 10 that I found in a drawer, and I listed that, and it went within like 5 minutes at a buy it now. So you never know what's going to be up there. If you're an eBay shopper, go to ebay.com and look for Matt Memories, and you'll find some pretty cool stuff there. But today is all about Andre the Giant. It's all about the 30th anniversary of his passing, and we're going to get on the line in just a second. We're going to reach out to Jackie, and then we will reach out to Chris. So why don't we do this seamlessly here and with our technology? We are going to pause for a second, and we will show you a couple of pictures, I guess, Marsh, while we're getting our guest on there for the video version. But for those listening on your favorite podcast platform, the next thing you'll hear and see or hear, actually, with our guest talking about Andre the Giant. All right, we're back here. We have Chris Owens first. Chris, how you doing? It's good to see you.
Good to see you, John. Thanks for having me on.
Well, this is a very historic week when it comes to the legacy of Andre the Giant. This 30 years ago this week, we got the news that he passed away, and so I felt it would be very special if I can get some people to talk about Andre. And in my opinion, you're the premier wrestling historian when it comes to Andre and that massive collection that you have. And you're in Peoria, correct?
I am. I live in a city right outside of Peoria.
Well, I certainly am happy that you're with us. We're also direct from her home in Florida, Jackie McCauley, formerly Jackie Bernard, who was one of the individuals that lived on the ranch in Ellerbe, North Carolina. Jackie, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. It's good to talk to you.
It's very, very nice to meet you. And the first question I have before we even get into it, how did you, Chris, and Jackie meet?
I met Jackie. Sure, I met Jackie through Facebook. I had started an Andre tribute page over 10 years ago. And we can get into that a little bit later. But one of the nice things about that was being able to connect with people all over the country as well as all over the world. And I was into it for a few years and happened to run across Jackie's name. And I was familiar with it. And I happened to send a message out to her one day. Wasn't sure if I'd get a response or not. And struck up a nice conversation and kind of told her what I was doing with Andre's tribute, trying to keep his legacy intact and as accurate as possible. And she couldn't have been nicer. She shared some information, shared stories and memories that she had. And, I've just gotten to know her a little bit better over the years from that.
Very cool. And you guys have actually met each other as well?
A couple of times we have. Chris was very instrumental in helping Ellerbe's Rankin Museum put up a Andre the Giant display. After several years after Andre passed, I brought a bunch of things that he had given me or I've collected and brought them down to Rankin Museum. And the lady there, Gail Benson, she worked through trying to categorize them and get history behind each one. And she came across Chris's Facebook page, and he really, really helped as far as getting all of the pictures and stories and items, set up correctly.
So he was pretty instrumental in assisting there. And that museum for Andre is still in that town?
Oh, yes. Yes. They're still collecting different things that people have donated to the museum. They recently expanded the footage of the museum, so they were able to display more and more of Andre's personal things.
And I'm sure that museum is visited pretty frequently by people from everywhere, I would guess.
Well, we're kind of one of those, Ellerbe is kind of one of those areas where you have to drive to get to it. It is rural, maybe about an hour and a half from most of the larger cities around it, but well worth the trip because people will get to see things that they couldn't possibly see anywhere else.
Now, Ellerbe, you're saying it's in the rural area. Is it near Charlotte or Winston-Salem or Raleigh? What large city would that be closest to?
Well, you're kind of spot on all of them. They're about an hour and a half to the east of Charlotte and to the south of Raleigh and Greensboro. And it's pretty much central as far as North Carolina.
Got it. I lived in North Carolina in 1981. I moved there to work in the New York Mets minor league system. So I was in a little town called Shelby, North Carolina. So a very small town. And then later on, when I was in the music business, I moved outside of Raleigh into a small little town called Garner, North Carolina. So
I'm the Boise Cascade plant.
Yeah, I'm very, very familiar with North Carolina, and I haven't been to the museum. It's something that I certainly would love to do if I'm in that area again. But
it's well worth the trip.
Oh, I'm sure it is. And for the fans who listen to this podcast, before we close this out today, I'll ask you specifically, any other information where they could find this, what it's called, and so people, when they're planning maybe vacations this year and they want to stop by to see something that would be so unique. And I believe it is the only Andre museum anywhere, I would believe, right?
I'm not really familiar with another one, but...
Chris would know, right?
Yeah, it's the only standalone Andre museum, and it's well worth the trip out there to see it.
Yeah, and Chris, I mean, you go back... as a wrestling fan, how many years?
Over 40.
Okay, so you were what? You were like 8 years old when Andre passed?
Well, no, I was a freshman in college.
Oh, you were a freshman? Okay, you were a freshman in college.
Yeah, I remember
Oh, that was 30 years ago, right? So you're 40 something.
So I started following pro wrestling in around 1980, 81, 7, 8 years of age. And just like the rest of us fans, it was something that caught on and got very passionate about, wanted to learn more about the sport, the wrestlers that were involved. And within that first year or two, I came upon Andre in one of the magazines. It was an old magazine we had in the house from the late 70s. And it was just a person that stood out, obviously, from the rest of the wrestlers. And even at a young age, I was just like, I want to know his story. What makes him different? Why is he so special? Why is he spotlighted on so many covers of those magazines back in the day? And it just kind of became a labor of love research, and which wasn't as easy as it is today. You would write letters to pen pals in the back of magazines. You would connect with other historians that were around much longer than I was at that point, and just started learning all this great information. And the more I learned, the more I was, really interested in more about the man behind the character than just what you saw on your TV screen.
And you actually did get to see Andre work, I believe, in Des Moines, Iowa, correct?
Times, absolutely. It was towards the late 80s, WWF events at that point, and got to be, up close, real close to him. I was a little nervous as a 16-year-old to approach him. He didn't look too approachable one night, and that was one of the things I regret. I wish I would have went back. Even if he told me no to an autograph, it still would have been a nice interaction.
Yeah. So right from the beginning, he was the guy. He was the guy that you gravitated to. Yeah. But you never really had an opportunity to either break bread with him or to...
just like I said, the one opportunity,
yeah.
I was around him a couple times when I was 16, 17, within a few feet, but it was in the Des Moines area too. But I just didn't feel like approaching him. As
a photographer, I had the chance to interact with Andre a few times. I mean, the first time was in 1974, and I was just really starting. I had the Freddie Blassie fan club I was running at the time, and I was invited out to Los Angeles to see the 22-man battle royal, and Andre was there. And I'll never forget it. He won that battle royal, and the next day there were TV tapings at KCOP Studios in Hollywood with Dick Lane, who did the play-by-play. And through my connection, it was Dr. Mike Lano, if that name is familiar to you. And I was with Richard Dawson's kids, and we were able to go backstage. Jeff Walton, who ran the Freddie Blassie fan club before me and ran PR for the Olympic Auditorium, invited us there. And we get in the back, and lo and behold, there's Andre the Giant getting a haircut. I mean, which was amazing to me, and said hello and didn't get a picture with him. But I do remember scooping up a fistful of hair and keeping that. And I don't know where it is today. But that was that. And then as I transitioned into more of a pro photographer and shot so many of Andre's matches, and you've seen those photos on my social media. One night in '76, I believe it was, all the wrestlers used to go to this little bar called the Savoy. It was on 46th Street between Broadway and 8th Avenue. So one night I was there with fellow photographer George Napolitano, who was kind of a mentor to me, and Andre was in the bar, and Professor Tanaka, Mr. Fuji were in the bar, and it was getting crowded. I mean, that place could only hold 100 people, and Andre was getting a little antsy, and George Napolitano suggested that we go across the street to the Edison Hotel, where there was a little restaurant and a pub there that no one was at. So we all ventured across the street, and I never will forget being able to sit down at a table with Andre, George, Tanaka, Fuji, and just kind of shoot the breeze a little bit. And his appetite for beer was evident, and I was just astounded. And I do remember that they sent somebody up the street to a local deli, and they brought back a bunch of food like cold cuts, sliced roast beefs, ham, and they were just enjoying themselves. And I never forget, Andre pulled a rib on. There was a wrestling fan that Andre just started chasing this fan around a car on that same street in Manhattan, and so those memories for me will last forever. Not only of the pictures I shot of him and the movies I shot of him back then, but what an amazing person. And Jackie, I'm going to ask you this question. Yes. When did you meet Andre? And tell us, how that all transpired and how you got into wrestling, and tell us that story to give everybody a little background.
Well, Frenchy and I moved down to Tampa from Pensacola, Florida, and we drove down to the Sportatorium, and Frenchy went up to the second floor, the booker's floor, and I was talking to the lady in the ticket office, And so Frenchy came in.
And Frenchy was in the business, right?
Yeah, he was a referee at that time.
Yep.
And so anyway, at the Sportatorium, Frenchy came and got me, and he said, I've got a friend I want you to meet. And I'm like, okay. So I left the ticket office and walked out into the lobby, and then Andre walked in. And I'm, like, hi, and it's a little bit different when you're a short person and you're meeting a tall person.
Yes.
Because you don't have that same difference in height feeling.
Yeah.
But still, he was a big man. And so anyway, we talked, he said hi, nice to meet you. And his English was a lot more limited at that point. And then they all left because they had to head towards the matches. And then I saw him a few times at Graham's Lounge after that. And then it got to the point that every time he'd come into Tampa, we would either go someplace with him, or he'd come over. We lived in Lutz, and he'd come over to our house in Lutz, and we would do barbecue or something like that there.
So you guys developed a friendship with this legend, and he was. Tell us a little bit about Andre during this time. I mean, obviously, so many people were wanting a piece of his time, and how did it feel? How did it feel developing this friendship with this amazing individual?
I saw him more out of the ring than I ever saw him in the ring.
Mm-hmm.
And because usually Frenchy would be refereeing, and so and he always seemed to draw a heck of a lot of heat when he refereed. And so we usually, I did not see either one of them, maybe outside I'd meet him at the bar on occasion. And we had Sundays off from wrestling in those days. So usually it was spending the afternoon, with him, and, going to a restaurant or something like that, or, down to the lounge or something. But I saw him in those days. I saw him at very few wrestling matches. I do remember he was on the main event with Harley Grace, and Frenchy was refereeing, and the fans didn't like the match at all. So everybody was upset, and it was drawing up to be something, like you get that rioting type feeling and stuff. So the next thing I know, one of the police officers came and got me and brought me to the back door, and they hustled Frenchy and Andre towards, Andre, Frenchy, and Harley towards Harley's car. They had moved his car around to another section before the fans could get there, but they got there first, and that's the first time I ever felt a volume of people moving me, and my feet weren't even touching the ground.
Wow.
And that was probably the most nervous I ever was at a wrestling match.
Yeah, those days are long gone. I mean, when it comes to the believability and how fans were close to rioting so many different times in so many different places. I experienced that at Madison Square Garden when Pedro Morales was the champion, and you would have to just kind of like, it's getting out of control, So the fans certainly were a lot different than they are today. But when did yes, go ahead.
Pardon?
No, go ahead. No.
I was just going to say, most of the time when we moved to Lutz, most of the time I would borrow Mike Graham's limousine. He had an older model limousine,
Mm-hmm.
and I would pick Andre up and bring him out to our little mini type of ranch in the country, and then Frenchy would meet us later. But I drove him around in the limo, and he kept saying he was going to buy me a limo driver hat. He never did.
When did he purchase the ranch in Ellerbe?
He had purchased it in 1979, and there was a big to-do about the person that had sold it, with the person that had sold it to him.
And that was a local attorney in that area, I believe. Benny Sharp was his name?
Benny was the one that represented Benny and Andre's lawyer from New York, and brought him, represented him in court. And Andre was home for that week and a half that the trial went on. And what it was is the guy, had said no, he didn't buy the house and surrounding land, that he had only bought some acreage in the back, and it was a big to do. And it was probably close to a week that it was on trial. And of course, being such a small town that, Rockingham, where the courthouse was, the sheriffs would take at lunch and breaks and stuff like that. They would just bring Andre downstairs where the jail cells were, and they'd have breaks, coffee and snacks, or lunch or something like that down in the jail area. So most people didn't even see Andre when he was there, because he'd come in and out of the back part of the jail. But the prisoners got to spend quite a few days with him.
I'm sure that was memorable, for sure.
I'm sure they liked it.
Exactly. So around this time, after all that, the lawsuit is done, and
Right.
and then Andre begins to obviously getting a closer relationship and a deep friendship that formed between you and your ex-husband Frenchy. And you and Frenchy, I guess Andre asked you both to move to Ellerbe.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. How did that happen?
Well, I hadn't seen Andre for a while. He hadn't been back to Tampa, but Dusty was booking at the time, Dusty Rhodes, and he and Frenchy they were best of pals. They joked around and spent so much time together, but they got into a heated argument, and as booker, Dusty fired Frenchy because he didn't like something that Frenchy did. And
Okay.
I never heard it what. But so Frenchy came home, and he's like, Dusty fired me. And I'm like, no, seriously. And he says, no, we got to think about going somewhere else. He said, I'm not working here anymore. And a day or so later, he gets a call from Andre, and Andre said, I've got a house up in North Carolina, and I'd like you and Jackie to move up here and take care of my house for me.
Wow. And was that an immediate yes by both of you?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And didn't he rename the ranch, or name the ranch the AFJ Ranch, after the three of you, Andre, Frenchy, and Jackie? Is that how that was named?
Well, the confusing part is the house that he started living in 1980 had a surrounding something like 75 acres, mostly wooded.
Mm-hmm.
And then connected to it was probably one of the most beautiful farms that I've ever seen in the area. Had a pond and just rolling pastures, and it was really, really pretty. And it went up for sale. And Andre said that he wanted to buy the farm. So we worked with Benny Sharp, and they settled all of the paperwork and everything. And then, so it had a house on it. So we rented out the house, and then we're fixing up the barns and stuff that were on the property. And Frenchy was in his element because he grew up in rural farmland, mainly cattle, up in the Gaspé of Quebec. So, and he was a he built things.
He was a construction worker?
Construction worker, asphalt, cement, you name it. He could do all of that stuff. And so anyway, we were fixing up the farm, and Andre came back from Europe, and he said, I want to buy some Texas Longhorn for the ranch. And,
okay.
I'm like, okay, I guess we can find some around here someplace. And so we put Texas Longhorn on the ranch, and we already had some horses because we had brought one of the horses up from Florida. He brought my horse up from Florida. So we started raising Texas Longhorns. Andre never did actually live on the ranch because we had a rental house, and then eventually it had a fire in the middle of the night, and the people got out, but the house was destroyed.
Okay. In doing the research, Andre first got involved or became interested in Texas Longhorn cattle after speaking to an airline pilot who had a ranch and a bar during a layover somewhere?
In France, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
a layover in France, and the guy started telling him about his Texas Longhorn cattle.
And that got Andre interested. And I believe he bought his first Longhorn cattle from another wrestler. Is that correct?
Yes, up in the mountains. I can't remember the name of the ranch.
Okay, but it was Nikita Koloff, right?
But it was Nikita Koloff, yes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. They had some beautiful, beautiful Longhorns, and we bought the first ones from him.
Okay. And so you spent how many years overseeing that while Andre was alive? How many years was that?
That was from it was from August of 80. We moved up on August 9th, 1980, and then we bought, Frenchy and I bought the ranch land in probably about maybe 2 months after Andre's death.
Mm-hmm. And I understand there was also a small little restaurant that was frequented called Dixie Burger in Ellerbe.
Oh, he loved Dixie Burger. He loved going down to Dixie Burger. Before he started really, having a lot of problems getting around and stuff, and, and he stopped going to Dixie Burger then. But we had a big pickup truck, and we had a van, and when Frenchy would get up and Andre was at home, he'd take the van to go down to Dixie Burger to have his coffee, because he always met all of the farmers and people down at Dixie Burger every morning for coffee. And Andre started going. So shortly after Frenchy fed the animals and left, then I could hear the shower running up on the third floor. And Andre would go down the stairs and get in the truck and drive down to Dixie Burger.
Wow.
And they knew he liked iced coffee. So if they got wind that Andre was in town, then they made sure they had a couple of gallons of iced coffee ready so he'd have something to drink when he got there.
How difficult was it over the years to see his health start to deteriorate?
That broke my heart. It broke my heart. Now I can see him going through the different stages. And with every stage, it just made me so upset. I drove, he called up after his knee surgery in Mississippi. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Can you take the van down here and pick me up?" And I said, okay. So I drove down, and, the next morning I drove down to Mississippi. And when I got there, it was late in the day. And he said, "I want to go home in the morning." I said, "You can't do that to me. I just spent all day driving down here, Mm-hmm. I said, "That's a little hard." And he said, "Well, then maybe we'll just stop in Atlanta overnight." I said, okay. So he actually he had his knees operated on, and what they did was they gave him a saddle block, and he sat there on the edge of a table or something as the doctor operated on both of his knees.
Wow.
And the next morning he was in the van, and we were heading back up to North Carolina. And needless to say, we did not stop when we got to Atlanta. And I drove back, and the thing is the house was difficult for him to get around. And the living room, kitchen, all of that is on the second floor, and his bedroom was on the third floor. So just climbing the stairs after knee surgery was difficult, but didn't stop him. But it got, it was the things like that with his, his knees went, and then his back started, and, it was just a domino effect, and it just got worse and worse.
Yeah, he was diagnosed as most people know with a very rare disorder, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right. It's acromegalia. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah. There's kind of a discussion whether it was acromegalia or giantism.
Yeah. Because
one stops at puberty and you're normal after that, and the other one doesn't. It continues with your growing.
And it was never treated, though. He refused medical help when he was diagnosed. I guess he got diagnosed in Japan.
Yes, he got diagnosed in Japan.
In the 70s.
He didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And then...
and he had a close call in North Carolina. He was at Duke University Hospital, and doctors saved his life after fluid built up around his heart.
That actually happened 3 different times.
3 different times, and they wanted to operate, but he never would agree to a procedure.
There really wasn't anything that they could do procedure-wise for that. He had he was feeling poorly, and Dr. Rankin would come by after he closed his office in Ellerbe, he'd come over to the house and he'd check on Andre and see how he's doing. And once again, say, you need to go to the hospital. And so finally he told Andre, he said, I am not going to come back here every night and watch you die. But if you want, I will help you get into a hospital and, they can help you with this. And so finally took like 2, maybe 3 days. He said, okay, Jackie, I'll go. And he went into to Rockingham's hospital. And then he was there for a couple of days, and they basically told him that he would have to be moved up to Duke, and they had the fluid removed. And he came back, and he was doing a lot better. And then a couple of years later, it happened again.
Yeah.
And then I noticed that Andre was looking kind of grayish in skin tone. And, he just didn't look well when he was home right before his father passed. And
that was in 93. And I mean, when he found out that his dad had passed, and that's when he went over to, he went over to, was it in France?
Yeah, it was just outside of Paris is where his family lives. And they, Andre had a chauffeur that would drive him around whenever he was in Paris. So Andre would go to the village during the day, and then he would go back to Paris to sleep in the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd been doing that for years whenever he went to see his parents. And most of the time, he'd spend his time with his parents during the day, and then towards evening he would play cards with his childhood friends. They were a group of, I believe it was 4 guys that he had known since kindergarten.
Yeah. And
they would play cards and everything, and then his driver would drive him back to Paris. And he had, when he got to Paris, and he had a few more drinks in the bar, which was unusual for him, but the driver stayed with him in the bar, and he called his lawyer, and he made some requests from his lawyer that evening. I'm not even too sure what. And then he said goodbye to the chauffeur, and the chauffeur said, same time in the morning. He said, yeah. And when the chauffeur got there, he called up to Andre's room, and there was no answer. And he kept calling. And then a few hours later, he said something to the hotel that he had been calling, and, Andre still hasn't answered his phone. So finally, after knocking on the door and everything, they opened it up, and the chain was across the door. But they could see Andre laying on the bed with the sheet just smooth and flat on top of him, and which would be a big clue to me that he died as soon as he laid down, because that man could tear up a bed. You had to start from scratch every time you had to remake it. If he was in bed for even an hour, he'd tear it up.
He'd wrestle the bed.
He would. And So anyway, they broke open the door, the chain from the door, and Andre was dead.
Yeah.
So he died as soon as he laid down.
And during that time, you were working at a travel agent as a travel agent in Rockingham, and you got the news when
a friend of Frenchy called me, and he said, "I'm sending somebody down to pick you up." He didn't want me driving.
Yeah.
And so brought me to the house. And like I said, I kind of get blurry after that. I remember working with a friend of mine from Charlotte. She was an event planner, and she basically put together the entire funeral service. Our farrier, who was a preacher, he led the service, and there was a big tent with Andre's casket there, but we had him cremated.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a second, because that's really a fascinating story. But I'm going to ask Chris. Chris is an Andre fan, super fan, historian now. Where were you? And obviously, you were seeing the deterioration of Andre in '92, and I mean, you started going downhill. How did you learn about his death, and how did that affect you?
I remember it pretty well. I was, like I said earlier, I was a freshman in college, and I got a call that night. I was in my dorm floor from my mom, and she had just watched the evening news, and it was televised on the news. Andre had passed away, and she called and told me that. And I was just shocked. You know, you never think that that's going to happen, but you did see his health decline those last few years, but it wasn't on my radar that could happen. And it did take a blow out of me, because, following him as a fan for all those years.
Yeah.
And, losing, your hero that you're kind of looking up to as a child. It was an event, something I still remember getting that phone call.
Yeah, that was, for me, I mean, watching his career in the latter years, and I was always hoping and wishing that he would just kind of like, all right, let's call it a day. Let's enjoy the rest of your life. And he worked and worked and worked. And I remember when I found out about Andre's death, and it was on the news, of course. And I was like, how do I cover this? I have a radio show to do. And then I had called around, and I gotten a number for Frenchy Bernard. And I'm going to ask Marsh now to play the opening of the Pro Wrestling Spotlight from January the 30th, 1993. And this is how we started the show.
Good morning, wrestling fans. How you doing? John Arezzi here, and we're going to start off the program today with some very sad news to report to you about the passing of one of wrestling's all-time greats, Andre the Giant. We're going to get on the phone right now if we can. Is the line clear? Okay. We're going to get on the phone right now with someone who was staying at Andre's house, who's been working with him a long time. Frenchy, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Late yesterday, we heard reports. Some of our correspondents began calling us, saying there was a rumor that Andre the Giant had passed away in France.
That's correct.
Okay.
He passed away Wednesday night. He went to bed and went to sleep, and when they went to wake him up Thursday morning, he was dead.
There was a rumor circulating that he had gone over there for the passing of one of his relatives. Was that true?
Yes, he went there. His daddy was very sick about 2 weeks ago, and while he was there, his daddy passed away. And the week, about, 10 days ago, and he stayed there for a few days after the funeral, and that was it.
Okay. I know this is a hard time for you.
I could hardly hear you.
Yes, I said I know this is a hard time for you, sir. What was your relationship with Andre?
We've been friends since 1972, and I've been working with him since, it's going to be 13 years this summer.
Okay, what capacity did you work with Andre?
I beg your pardon?
What capacity did you work with Andre?
I look after all his business out here.
Okay, now how old was Andre?
46 years old.
And Andre, as up to this year, as far as we know, had also competed in Japan and wrestled occasionally for the All Japan Wrestling Group. He was certainly a legend in the wrestling business, and this is such a big story in professional wrestling. I just appreciate your time coming on with us so we could confirm this very, very sad story of one of the legends of professional wrestling, Andre the Giant, passing away in France. And Frenchy, I appreciate you coming on the air with us to confirm the story.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, you heard it direct from North Carolina, and Andre certainly was not in the best of health over the last few years. Donnie Liable is going to come on with the news capsule momentarily. I think we should just have about 5 or 10 seconds moment of silence for Andre the Giant, and then we'll return after this break.
It was a hard show for me to get through. I tell you that. It was someone that I was a young kid in my early teens and getting to see him for the first time and reading about him in the magazines and then seeing that spectacular debut at Madison Square Garden, March 26, 1973, against Buddy Wolf. And I was able to document that on 8mm film, and the only footage of that debut. But covering that story for me was not an easy one. What I do want to ask you, Jackie, is that you have said that it could have been your proudest moment. Andre's family wanted him to be buried, but you knew that his wishes were to be cremated. So talk us through that process and what happened when this took place.
Well, the lawyer did the talking on phone calls and stuff, going back and forth to his family, to Andre's family. But his mother wanted him buried next to his father, because they had just buried his father. And, it broke my heart. My sister flew out with me.
Yeah, you actually flew. You actually flew with your sister to France to.
Yes.
Okay.
And Andre's driver picked us up at the airport, and we met up with Andre's family, and we went by the funeral home. I'm not exactly too sure why, but they brought us by the funeral home. And so anyway, and we spent the afternoon with his mother. And my sister and I both felt so badly, that we were there to take her son's body. But it was Andre's wish that he be cremated. He didn't, he never said that he wanted his ashes spread at the farm or anything like that. He said that he wanted to be cremated. So they could have cremated him and buried him next to his father. But, they didn't want to, or something. I'm not too sure. But so we came back, flew back with Andre's body. And when we landed in, I believe it was Philadelphia, they couldn't put Andre's body in the plane going to Charlotte because the cargo hold wasn't big enough to get the coffin in. And so when I got back to Ellerbe, I found out that Frenchy, I don't know who he was talking to, but one of the retired police officers had he was retired and rented out cars and vans and stuff like that. And he had his crew take all of the seats out of the back of the van and sent it up to Charlotte, to the airport. And they drove Andre's body back to Southern Pines, which is just to the north of Ellerbe. And that's where they were going to cremate his body. And so we had planned my friend mainly had planned most of the things for the funeral service and that type of deal. But Frenchy, bright and early in the next morning, when he knew Andre had arrived in Southern Pines, he went up there and he kept telling the guy, I need to see the body. I just need to see that the body is, that it's Andre. I just can't believe it. And the guy didn't want to show him the body because Andre had been dead so long since then. But Andre said, well, there's a plate in his foot. Can I at least see that? And the guy told him, he said, yes, you can. I'll let you know after we cremate his body, and we'll show you the plate. And Frenchy just would not accept Andre's death until he knew it was Andre.
Yeah, that had to be so difficult for him, for you, and for someone that you were with all the time.
We were our own little family there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they'd play cribbage out on the porch constantly because Andre loved cribbage. And then we got the bulldozer, and Andre spent his time, bulldozing the trees, knocking them over, and he had his huge long chainsaw. It's like twice the size of a normal chainsaw, and he'd go out and cut the trees, and he'd help with the vaccination of the animals, and he'd take the dogs for what he called his walk every day around the entire property. And he'd ride the 3-wheeler and the dogs would run.
Yeah.
And we had the Datsuns on the inside. He loved to just to watch television and pull practical jokes, and we'd stay up all night long, not with gambling cards or anything like that. We were playing Uno all night long with our friends.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I know. I know that from the footage that I saw on some of the documentaries and him driving around on the 4-wheeler, and I mean, that just big smile of his. He seemed to be so happy when he was on the ranch and he was driving around and being in an element where this was his place, this was his friends, his family, with you and Frenchy being closest to him in the United States. And
well, he had a lot of friends in Ellerbe.
Yeah. He had a whole little community, and So and the town only was about 1,000 people, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When it came to his memorial service, I mean, was there a big contingent of wrestling executives or wrestlers, or was it a private ceremony?
No, it was open to any of the wrestlers that wanted to come, and it was closed to the general public. And of course, the great thing in Ellerbe was, the sheriff's department, who handled the traffic and everything, they knew who was Andre's friends and who wasn't Andre's friends. So, they're basically, he had at least a dozen old girlfriends that showed up, because at one time they met each other in the bathroom. They were all standing around, calling each other by states.
Yeah.
Didn't know the names.
Yep.
But they knew the states.
Yeah. Amazing.
She had a lot of female friends.
Yes. Amazing. When we continued covering that episode of Pro Wrestling Spotlight, one of our reporters, a guy that did a weekly news report named Don Liable, who's a 50-year-old friend of mine now, he paid tribute to Andre, and I want to play that clip for both of you now, and just to kind of hear how we remembered and how we pay tribute to Andre on the Pro Wrestling Spotlight from January 30th, 1993. So let's go to that clip now.
John, I am, and I'll tell you something. When I first heard about it last night, there's few people that are as big as the business itself. Of course, in the latter years, it's been Hulk Hogan, Bruno Sammartino in his era. Andre the Giant certainly right up there with them, because Andre was not just a quote-unquote company champion or a company man. The entire world was his promotion. He moved around, worked for everybody, made a lot of money for a lot of people, especially in the 70s and the 80s. And when I heard that yesterday, quite frankly, I didn't want to believe it. And this morning, I heard it on CBS Radio and spoke to a few of Andre's friends and opponents, and really was a shock. But I did prepare a little something here to go over his career a little bit, and have a few things maybe to stir some interest with some of the listeners as far as some Andre memories there.
Okay, Don.
Alrighty, John. Well, the world of professional wrestling mourns the loss of one of its greatest drawing cards this century. Andre the Giant has died. While in Paris, France, attending his father's funeral this past Wednesday, reports have it that after settling down for the evening, Andre died in his sleep at age 45. A native of France for his entire career, the Giant was billed out of Grenoble, France. He was brought to North America by fellow French wrestler Frank Valois, who became his manager. Andre's first appearance in Madison Square Garden came in 1972 against Buddy Wolf. Billed at the beginning of his career in the early 1970s at 7 feet tall, 400 pounds, to 7 foot 5, 500-plus pounds, as the years went on, the Giant's appearance on a card meant a healthy box office return. Andre's participation in battle royals, particularly in Los Angeles and San Francisco, as well in handicap matches, sometimes 3-on-1, enhanced his invulnerability in the ring. Performing in Japan, Germany, and throughout the U.S. for virtually every territory through the 1980s, in his adopted homeland of Montreal, Canada, during the 1970s, along with Dino Bravo, Gino Brito, and Edward Carpentier, Andre was responsible for the success of the Grand Prix promotion. Called the Gentle Giant and the eighth wonder of the world, two other past professional wrestlers had the disease acromegaly, a growing disorder, as Andre, both from the 1950s, Sky High Lee and the French Angel, Maurice Tillet. Now, to the best of records concerning sufferers of acromegaly, no one past the age of 45 has lived. Perhaps Andre's greatest moment in the wrestling spotlight came on March 29, 1987, for his WrestleMania 3 match with Hulk Hogan in a Pontiac Silverdome before more than 97,000 fans. The following year, on February 5, 1988, in Indianapolis, Indiana, the Giant won the World Wrestling Federation heavyweight title amidst a controversial pinfall over then-champ Hulk Hogan. Now, after possessing the belt for a couple of minutes, Andre gave the title to Ted DiBiase. When looking back at some of Andre's most memorable feuds, names as Big John Studd, Killer Kowalski, The Sheik, Killer Khan, and Butcher Vachon had a list a mile long. Living in North Carolina in recent years on his horse farm, Andre appeared in numerous TV and film projects, one of them that comes to mind portraying Bigfoot on the TV series The $6 Million Man. That was Andre's first national exposure in the U.S. to the mainstream media. Just as with Gorgeous George, Andre the Giant will always be a larger-than-life character that, when looked back upon his contributions to the game in the coming years, there will be no debate. Andre was a winner. For Pro Wrestling This Week, I'm Don Liable reporting.
A couple of facts there wrong now that I listened back to it, a couple of dates and such, but, a kind of a fitting tribute to a man that was certainly larger than life. The last clip that we're going to play today, and then Jackie will say our goodbyes, and I'm going to talk to Chris further about his collection and his reverence for Andre. But we get, part of our show was to get calls from listeners from around the Long Island, Queens area. And when we announced Andre's passing, the phones lit up. And we remember one call that came in. And this was a story that was kind of pretty cool about a memory from a fan who ran into Andre and had quite a cool story to tell us. So why don't we go to that clip now?
Let's go to Jeff from Sheepshead Bay. Jeff, you're next.
How you doing, John?
Okay.
Yeah, it's a really shocker that Andre the Giant died.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I remember him when I went to the bar, and him and Ed LaSalle came into my Cadillac, and we rode around to the Carnegie Deli, and Andre treated me to a sandwich.
Uh-huh.
It was unbelievable.
Now, what year was this?
About 1980, 81.
That's when he was in his big feud with Hogan back then, I would guess, right?
He was feuding with Hogan, and Hogan was having fun at the bar, too. It was real nice. You didn't know who else was in the car. Oh, yeah, and Andy Kaufman was in the car, too.
Andy Kaufman.
Yeah.
Another great...
I got friendly with him, too.
Yeah, Andy and I went to the same college back in Boston.
Yeah, he was a big wrestling fan. I showed him some, wrestling sheets, and he said he used to get that, too.
Yeah.
All right.
Good story.
Take care.
Thanks a lot,
Bye-bye.
Jeff.
30 years later, I'm going to ask both of you, Jackie, I'm going to ask you the one memory that surpasses all others with your relationship with Andre the Giant.
Okay. Wow. That's a good
You probably have so many.
I do. I just remember him living, in the living room. He spent so much time. He loved watching TV when he was at home. And he had a big oversized chair that he sat in. Actually had probably 3 different chairs, but, one at a time. And we had miniature Datsuns, and he had a Datsun when he was younger, and he loved Datsuns. And we had 2 of them, and their favorite thing to do was just to pester him until he picked him up and sat him in the chair. And while he was sitting in the chair, one would go to the right and slide between the leg and the arm of the recliner, and the other one would go to the left, and he'd slide she would slide into the leg of the recliner. And they would sit there with him for hours, and it didn't matter how Andre moved or whatever. There really wasn't an overabundance of room, but those dogs knew that he would not hurt them.
Mm-hmm.
And they sat with him watching television all night long.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Jackie, I'm going to keep Chris on for a bit, but Jackie, I really appreciate this. And Chris, I appreciate you making this connection. This is going to be a show that a lot of people are going to be very interested in hearing, especially after the 30-year anniversary here that we are reliving today. Jackie, I want to thank you for your time, and we'll figure out a way to get this show to you if you want to listen to it. We'll get it to you somehow. But it's been a pleasure. It's been my honor to talk to you about this legend, Andre the Giant. Thank you, Jackie.
thank you. I appreciate your time. And Chris, I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. Take care, Jackie.
All righty.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Wow. I mean, you don't know what to expect. Obviously, you knew Jackie and developed a friendship, but what great memories. What a memory she has.
Yeah. And you can tell after talking to her how sweet and genuine she is. And there's no surprise why Andre picked Jackie and Frenchy to be that close with. He was very guarded with who he had around him.
Yes.
He had to trust them.
Yes.
And, that when I went out and met Jackie, spent a day and a half out in Ellerbe with her, and she couldn't have been nicer. She took me all around the town, Dixie Burger, hardware store where you bought that chainsaw at, the ranch, of course. And I just, I told her before I left, I said, I totally understand why Andre chose you guys to be such good friends.
Yeah.
It's hard to find genuine good people.
Yeah, what a great lady she sounds like. And that's amazing. And thank you again for setting that up. But when did you start getting serious about collecting Andre memorabilia?
It started the first wrestling card my dad took me to. And they used to have the old merchandise tables.
Mm-hmm.
And they typically would have your T-shirts, programs, photos, and buttons. And the very first piece I got was actually this. This was a souvenir stand, probably around 1980 or 81.
And showing a button for those of you who are listening to the podcast, not watching.
So that was at the merchandise table that night. I also got a program that had them in there. And as I got a little bit older, back in the early 80s, I had access to the weekly magazines that would come out. So I'd always collect all the magazines. Towards the late 80s, in the back of the magazines, you would start seeing advertisements for tape trading. And so I was able to connect with individuals all across the U.S. that had tapes of Andre in different territories that I wasn't able to see him at the time. And what a wealth of information. It was like a library out there. And the more I was watching, the more I was researching, knowing what territories he worked. And, you mentioned, you were there for his debut in 73. And a lot of fans didn't realize he had worked for 7 years prior to even stepping foot in the garden that night. He had been to France, England, Spain, Scotland, Iraq, Canada.
And he used a few different names. Yeah, he used the giant Jean Faree and the giant Roussimoff, I believe. But the name, the moniker that stuck with him, that people remember him for, Andre the Giant, was actually given to him by Vince McMahon Sr. And the first time he used that, I believe, was at that Madison Square Garden show in March of 73.
Yeah, it was one of the first times he was used as Andre the Giant.
Yeah, because I remember when he was advertised for that show, it was like Andre the Giant. I mean, this is the giant Jean Faree. I mean, why are they changing his name? It was already like, what are they doing? And but that's the name that stuck. And I believe Vince McMahon Sr. became an exclusive booking agent for him not too far after that. And those were amazing days.
They really were.
Yeah, and your collection, started to grow. But what year in earnest did you say, all right, I'm going to start looking for artifacts? And because you got quite the collection of stuff that when I saw you in Iowa at the Hall of Fame and you had the display set up and you showed me a Get Well card, a giant Get Well card that was signed by everybody.
Yeah.
What an amazing artifact that is. But when did you start seriously collecting these artifacts and how do you find this stuff?
Probably in the late 80s is when I started. And, being able going into the 90s, especially with the advent of the internet, being able to connect with individuals, friends that were close to Andre, some of them had information. They had, their old programs, photographs. That's one of the areas I love collecting are original photographs, because I've always thought they tell the story, and being able to put those photographs, in sequence, showing his career all across the world. So I love collecting photographs, interesting figures, toys that were produced in different countries. that a lot of the mainstream fans in the 80s and early 90s, weren't privy to, especially in Japan. They loved him over there.
Yes.
And I was able to connect with a few hardcore collectors in Japan that had still original posters, programs, toys, memorabilia of him over there.
And you also have items like one of his passports as well.
I do. I think he had 3 passports left. Jackie had one. I believe his daughter has another one. And then I had the third. And, after the A&E treasure hunt show, I think Jackie kind of brokered a deal with him that they could have her passport on loan to be able to show it. And I did a display at one of the last year's WrestleMania Access events. Yeah. And they had displayed, I had given him a poster. It was actually the only playbill I'd ever seen for his debut at Madison Square Garden back in March of '73. Yeah. I got that from a fan who had taken it. He thought he took it off the wall at the Garden or one of the other venues at the time that advertised the month before, Andre's coming to the Garden next month.
Yeah, that was on the show. I do remember that.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite pieces.
Yeah,
because that was right.
And you also have a copy of an X-ray of his giant hand. And when you compare your hand to it, and when you showed it to me, it was like, what a massive hand.
It's unbelievable. I worked in the medical field for many years, and we get X-rays every once in a while. You do not see a hand anywhere close to that.
No.
And a funny story about that is when we were filming the A&E show, the producers wanted Big Show, who was there at the house, to put his hand up against Andre's to film it for the show. And he said, "I'll do it, but you're not going to use it on air. It's going to kill my gimmick." And it would have.
How was that experience like when you were contacted to do Lost Treasures? And ironically, I mean, they licensed like 18 seconds of my footage for that show. So that was kind of cool. But tell us about that experience dealing with WWE and A&E and getting this episode shot.
Yeah, I couldn't have had a nicer time. They were all very professional. They did their pre-screening, very thorough. Mm-hmm. And the day of the taping, they really did do it like in real time. And Big Show and AJ Francis came over to the house, and Big Show was definitely very respectful of Andre. He knew the history of him. AJ, of course, too. But with Big Show and his his introduction to wrestling, he wasn't really happy with being introduced as Andre's son. He knew better than that.
Yeah.
But he was really interested in learning more about Andre's history. He took the time to look over all my pieces. In fact, after the taping, he spent about an hour just one-on-one with me, sharing stories, and wanted to see other things that weren't highlighted in the show.
Yeah, that was a great episode for sure. And I want to ask you a question about, obviously your collection is massive. You have so much there. Is there a holy grail that you might have or would like to have? So do you have one right now that's your holy grail of everything that you've collected on Andre? And is there an item that's out there that you're like, boy, I wish I could get this, So I'd appreciate your comments on that.
That's a good question. I have several items that I'm really proud to have and definitely cherish. You mentioned the greeting card. That was a card Jackie was talking about his knee surgery earlier, that she had to pick him up. That was in '91. And, from what I understand, mentally he wasn't doing very well after that. I think he knew his days in the ring were pretty limited.
Yeah.
So Vince or a couple other people in the office commissioned an artist to create this oversized card, and he got the entire locker room to sign it in 1991 and some of the office individuals, and they presented it to him at SummerSlam that year. And they said that he was just over the moon tickled when he got that. In fact, I was at a show not too long ago with Bushwhacker Luke, and I showed him that card, and his eyes lit up. He remembered signing that. And he remembered, because he worked with Andre that night, Andre's reaction to seeing that card. And he just was blown away. He saw that card again for the first time. I got documents. I've got passports that of Andre's career. Jackie was nice enough once to float me one of his shirts that he used to wear on the ranch all the time, his old handprint shirt that he wore. It was he wore a size 5XL shirt. And I've brought that out to displays, and fans love seeing that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have, would you consider your collection like the foremost Andre the Giant memorabilia collection anywhere?
I think as far as quality, I would say yes. I don't know about quantity. There's always going to be individuals out there that collect more. But, being able to look at the collection and kind of getting a good representation, not only of his career, but his life, I'd like to think it pretty much encompasses quite a bit.
Yeah. And for those of you who will be watching the video version of this podcast, a lot of the photographs and a lot of those items that Chris had mentioned, you'll be able to see those as they're floated in during the discussion. So you get an opportunity to see that stuff. And what's next for you when it comes to Andre? Are you always on the hunt for stuff?
I'm always on the hunt looking for things. Autographs, those are very tough to come by.
Very tough.
Yeah, authenticated autographs of Andre.
Yeah.
One of the things I really enjoy now is being able to go out to wrestling events and shows and be able to do an Andre the Giant display.
Yep.
I really enjoy talking to fans, sharing memories, sharing stories, hearing their stories, letting them relive their memories of Andre and making sure that his legacy stays out there.
Yes. One final question. Obviously your relationship with Jackie is so very cool. Have you ever had any interaction with his daughter?
No, I haven't. I have not. I know she a few years ago, started to go out to some wrestling conventions and represent her father, which was great to see.
Yeah.
But I have not had the opportunity to meet her yet.
Yeah, she's going to be at at an autograph show called the 80s Wrestling Con up in New Jersey in the first week of May, I believe. So I'm probably going to be at that show. And she really kind of keeps under the radar, doesn't she?
She does, yeah. Definitely kind of keeps a low profile, which is totally understandable.
And that was his only heir?
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, this has been such a treat for me, and such a pleasure to see you again after such a while. I mean, we communicate on Facebook. And before you go, I mean, why don't you let everybody out there know how they can, I think your Facebook page, are you on Instagram, or give us the social media accounts that people can see this vast collection, because you put pictures up all the time.
I do quite a bit. Try to do on a daily post. You can find me on Facebook under my name, Chris Owens. You can also find me on Twitter at Chris Owens at Twitter.
Not Instagram though.
No.
Okay, so Twitter and Facebook.
Yes.
I would highly recommend you check it out, because it's almost like every day there's a different treat that comes our way, and just the incredible amount of content that you provide for the wrestling fans and the Andre the Giant fans is so cool to see. And I'm sure that you and I will run into each other again somewhere down the road. And this has been an absolute pleasure for me. And I can't thank you enough for making the introduction to Jackie. And I can't thank you enough for appearing on this 30th anniversary of Andre the Giant's death right here at Pro Wrestling Spotlight.
Well, thank you very much, John. It's meant a lot to me to be asked to be part of this show. It was great connecting with Jackie again, hearing her stories.
Yes.
And I just hope that the fans out there always remember Andre and what he meant to the business and what he meant to so many fans across the world.
All righty. Well, Chris, thank you so much. And we appreciate your time today.
All right, take care.
Marsh, I mean, that was very cool. That was a very cool interview, not just with Jackie, but with Chris. My goodness.
Yeah. Talking about being a fly on the wall, like, these are the conversations that I think that make your show and other similar style shows like so important and cool. Is the guys like me who I was a baby. I was 9 when all this kind of happened. Like, to be able to have everyone can kind of come together and recall that. and pull back stuff. Like, this is what the whole point of this is. This is what makes me excited to be part of the show, is to be able to sit here and listen to all of it. Like, I'm impressed that it was able to come together so smoothly, to be honest. I love it.
Yeah, it was really good. Chris was so instrumental in getting Jackie, and I didn't know what to expect, but it was just fabulous. And I can't believe 30 years ago, and we're talking about it today and reliving it with people who are probably the biggest. Jackie, I mean, the friendship she had, and Chris with his enormous amount of knowledge on Andre the Giant. So it was very, very cool. But we did have a little bit more stuff, I believe, on the show. And if you want to hear the entire episode, the uncut episode from January 30th, 1993, there's one way to do it. That's patreon.com/John Arezzi. So if you want to check out the entire show and all the other shows in the archive, why don't you do that? Yeah. But what else do we have here with this, Andre?
I would definitely recommend that too, because this is one of those episodes where I was listening to it. Like, I almost felt silly trying to find clips, because I was like, where do you pull from? Like, so much of this is so good, and it's so Andre focused, which, again, as a kid, and I was like right before I got into wrestling, but Andre I knew because of Princess Bride, and that was like my favorite movie, and I knew he was a wrestler, and I'd see the clips. So it's like, I didn't know where to pull from, right? So there is a lot of other stuff that went on that you talked about, but the one thing I wanted to make sure I asked you about, because you said you were there, sounded like a pretty interesting story, was Andre took on boxer Chuck Wepner, who I'm not familiar with, at Shea Stadium. This is also the one, I believe, with Ali versus Inoki, right? This was a big show.
Yes, it was. It was June 25th, 1976. It was Shea Stadium. They did the big build-up with Ali and Inoki, which turned out to be a shoot, which was crazy. And they had an undercard. It was on a closed circuit at Shea Stadium, in the undercard. And the semi-main event was Andre the Giant against Chuck Wepner. There's a lot of speculation on that. And I took photographs there, and it was just amazing. It was amazing because it really, I believe it was a shoot. Yeah, and there was a brawl at the end. There was a brawl between Gorilla Monsoon was in there, and Wepner's trainers and Andre. I mean, you could tell when Andre was legitimately pissed, and he was legitimately pissed there. And that was on the same card where Bruno Sammartino came back from the broken neck to defeat Stan Hansen on that show. And there were others. Yeah, there was like Strongbow and Billy Whitewolf were against the Executioners. Ivan Putski was on that show against Baron Cicluna, and Kevin Sullivan opened the show against Jose Gonzalez, that notorious figure that he was. But yeah, that was when I look at my archives, and I didn't have press passes for that. I wasn't able to. There was so much demand from around the globe. I had seats, probably box seats at Shea, first row. And I took a number of photographs of that particular match. And there's one with Andre with his hand raised, which is a classic historic shot, and several others. And I recently discovered some pictures I took of Chuck Wepner before that match. He was walking around the field at Shea Stadium, and I called him over and took a few pictures of him. And so that was a very memorable night for me, June 25th, 1976.
That's fantastic. That was my note here. As soon as you said like that you remembered being there for that, I actually wrote down, does he have pictures of this?
Oh yeah, my goodness. I have some color shots, Bruno and Hansen and the I have quite an array of photographs from Shea Stadium from that night that I somehow I'll find a way to get those marketed to some of the fans.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's were you strictly doing still photography? You weren't doing 8mm?
No, the 8mm days were over. Okay. I stopped shooting 8mm film in 74 after I had gotten my press credentials, and that was the end of that. But yeah, there's a lot of photographs, and the negatives that I have from that show. When I look at them today, it just brings it back like it was yesterday.
It's amazing. That's the whole thing. Relive the history, right?
Mm-hmm.
One final thing too, because you mentioned the 8mm, you did recount, and I want to play one final clip.
Okay, for the video version of this show.
For the video version of this show,
because there was no audio back then. It was a silent movie,
right? However, almost the exact same length as the video is you recounting being able to be there and having the video. So I'm going to
Oh.
overlay that for the people who are watching it on YouTube/Pro Wrestling
Nice.
Spotlight. But for
Yeah.
the audio, you'll just hear John talk about it. I want to play real quick you remembering being able to see him for the first time at Madison Square Garden and catching it on
Excellent.
film.
Love to hear it.
Unfortunately, that's all we have of Andre the Giant. From here on in will be memories. And I remember the first time seeing Andre the Giant in 1972. I got it on film. I filmed his first few matches at the Garden against Chuck O'Connor, Buddy Wolf, Professor Tanaka, and I have those on 8mm film. And now they are certainly collector's items. And when Andre first made his walk down the aisle at Madison Square Garden, his head just above anything else in the arena, the stature of the man, the magnitude of the man will certainly be long remembered by wrestling fans all over the world, and a sad day in pro wrestling.
Yeah. The memories. Who knew?
I'll be honest.
How historic that would be.
Yeah. And you being able to catch it. And I was thinking about it too, 30 years ago. And somehow I'm listening to all this stuff and getting choked up. You know what I mean? Like, this is a lot. This is really cool.
I had a couple of moments there talking to Jackie that I was getting a little teary-eyed.
Yeah.
No one experienced it like she did.
And hearing those stories, the 5X T-shirt that Chris Owens mentioned, that he'd been able to get a hold of, you're going to see the photo along the way. He's wearing the shirt. That's what and it's not loose.
Yeah, that was so cool about what Chris provided. And the other photographs that we have, I mean, throughout this entire interview, I mean, there'll be photographs that'll be laid in that kind of follow the story in a lot of ways. So you got your work cut out for you this week, my friend.
Oh, it'll be worth it. And I mean, the fact that he's wearing a 5X shirt and it's tight, you guys got to see it. So
awesome.
That's what I got for this week. I'm thinking next week we talk about some of the other non-Andre stuff, if that's good with you.
If we, it depends on what happens next week. Next week is going to be really cool. I mean, it's the first time ever appearance on the program of Eric Bischoff. And this is right towards the end of the Bill Watts regime. Eric had gotten a bigger position. I brought him on to discuss what was going on in WCW and his new roles. And I reached out to Eric because I hope to see if he would like to relive that history with us here at the show. I don't know if he's going to say yes or no, but we'll have to wait and see for next week's program if Eric's going to be here talking about it, or if we're just going to play the clips. But either way, the fans out there listening to this show are going to really enjoy that first appearance by Bischoff. It was really a historic time where he started to get real power in the wrestling business. But Marsh, as always, I always appreciate what you do here, and I would love for you to let everybody know how to get a hold of you on social media.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at RefMarsh. On Instagram, I'm at MarshRef. And then on Venmo, I'm at RefMarsh. Go ahead and send some tips. I'm just kidding.
There you go. Send some tips to all of us. I'm at Matt Memories on Venmo. Send me a few bucks too while you're at it. Or join Patreon. Go to patreon.com/John Arezzi. $5 gets you in the door. Or go to the eBay store at Matt Memories, eBay and Matt Memories, and you can be able to see some really cool stuff on there, and there'll be more stuff to come. But thank you so much, Marsh, and that's going to wrap up this edition of John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight podcast. Join our private group, facebook.com, Pro Wrestling Spotlight podcast and radio show. And now there's some questions you have to answer to be part of that private group. They're not very difficult, but if you're a fan and a listener of this show, you'll know how to answer these questions because I get a lot of requests from people, and you check them out, and it's like, do they really listen to it, or they're just trying to join a private group? Because there's less than 600 members in that private group. So now it's going to be a little bit more difficulty to be in it. But that's the place where you could discuss all things Pro Wrestling Spotlight podcast and radio show. We do have a public page to share history, and that's doing really well. The engagement there is incredible. And that is the facebook.com, John Arezzi's Matt Memories. I mean, the engagement there has picked up thousands of percentage points in the last 4 months. There's a lot of engagement there. There's a private group there as well. Our YouTube channel is doing well. Numbers are up there. Go to youtube.com/Pro Wrestling Spotlight. Follow me on Twitter at John Arezzi. And Instagram has really rocketed. I mean, I put up a picture of Jimmy Snooker and John Studd, and that had like 400 likes. And that had over 1,000 likes on it. So all of the pictures that I'm putting up there, people are really digging and they're sharing it, and there's new followers every day. So the numbers are growing everywhere. And don't forget to check out the sister podcast, Matt Memories from Madison Square Garden. Covers all the shows I attended at the Mecca of all arenas 50 years ago. And we just finished the January 15th, 1973 episode, as I mentioned. And those movies, the first I ever shot, are up on patreon.com/John Arezzi. Check out that podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Matt Memories from Madison Square Garden is co-hosted by Tim Poutre and written and researched by Richie Garcia. I want to thank our producer, creative director, Marsh. I want to thank our Patreon executive producers, Anthony Pyrus and Joe Holloway, and for all the patrons for your support, helping with the production costs for this show. Until next week, when we relive more history, talking about Eric Bischoff in his debut on Pro Wrestling Spotlight, this is John Arezzi for PWS.